Chapter 21 Two Kids and a Dog. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Half an hour later in a downtown alley, a child covered in dirt was hiding behind the trash can, panting. The sound of shouting with the threat to kill was farther and farther away. Phew! Scared me. He wiped cold sweat off his forehead. How did these fools get so smart? They even caught me switching the cards. Good thing I ran fast and got out early, otherwise I'd have died in that awful place. For only a few $100, was it really worth it? Muttering to himself, he took out a bunch of silver coins from his pocket. He counted them one by one, wiped the sweat off with his sleeves, and grinned. More than 300 pounds, ah ha ha. Made it. My first pot of money, how should I spend it? How about you pay your medical bills with it? Someone next to him said with a low voice, whispering in his ear. Or exchange them for your life. Oh! The child was so scared he fell on the ground. He rolled over and saw a young man sitting on top of the trash can. In the dim light, he recognized him as the fool he ripped off earlier. Right away he managed a smile. Oh, you're my older cousin. Yes, little cousin. Xuanhuan sneered at him, throwing the bag of waste the kid gave him earlier on the ground. Little cousin, you ran pretty fast, I almost couldn't catch you. Here's your stuff. Sure. The kid smiled and walked backwards, then suddenly turned and ran. 10, 9, 8. Xuanhuan watched while he whispered the countdown, motionless, as the kid ran towards the end of the alley. When he got to 3, the trembling kid walked backwards from the alley, his face terrified. At the end of the alley, a mud-stained dog grinned, 2 rows of bad teeth exposed, a dead rat tail still left on one of its teeth. Old Phil was blocking the exit. No one could leave. Little cousin, what's the rush? Xuanhuan pulled out a rope from his suitcase and pushed down on the kid's shoulder. Let's talk. I was wrong, big brother. Please, let me go. 5 minutes later, the kid was tied up. He curled up in the corner of the alley and blinked his big watery eyes, as if he was going to cry. He seemed so pitiful. Xuanhuan just quietly watched him cry until he stopped. Done crying. Xuanhuan smiled and asked. Are you hungry? I can make you a bowl of noodles. The kid looked like he ate a fly. Hey! Don't you have any compassion? No cousin, I do not have compassion. What you did today just wasn't right. He reached out and pinched the kid's face. Since you call me cousin, let this cousin teach you how to do the right things. He started cracking his knuckles and sneered. Hey, what are you doing? The kid was scared. Curled up, he raised his voice and shouted, I'm warning you. I'm really powerful. Watch, I'll get someone to teach you a lesson. Ha! Xuanhuan laughed. Old Phil. Old Phil came over, grinning as well. There was no telling what the big dog had eaten earlier, its mouth was so stinky. Its tongue was still licking the blood on its teeth, chewing half of rat tail. Well, okay, you got me. You got me. The kid's face turned pale. He pointed to the silver coins with his chin. Here. Rules of the Brotherhood, you see it, you get half. Xuanhuan did not take it, and just looked at him. The kid's face turned sour. Hey, we are all from the streets, be appreciative. 50.50 is a good offer. Never mind, 40.60. Still no. Do you want 30.70? Sorry, I don't want things that were stolen or cheated. What do you want? The expression of the kid suddenly became angry. I can't give you all of it. Xuanhuan sighed. Apologize to me. What? Xuanhuan looked at him with no expression and repeated himself. Apologize to me. I will not. The kid turned his head to the side. Apologize, Xuanhuan repeated it again. Do not even think that I'd ever say. The kid stopped halfway, unable to go on with Yi Qingxian glaring at him. Yi Qingxian did not say anything. He silently watched him, without a word. For some reason, the kid felt guilty under that gaze. After a long time, his head turned a little bit, and he bowed his head. Sorry, he mumbled. Yi Qingxian sighed and reached out to loosen his rope. Watching him curled up in the corner, he suddenly felt sorry for him. Well, I was going to give you a beating, but never mind now since you apologized. What else do you want? The kid stared at him. Pervert. I know it's very tough to be hungry. Stealing and cheating aren't that big of a deal. Yi Qingxian reached out and patted on the kid's hat. But once you're used to stealing, one day you'll realize that some things cannot be stolen or cheated. Don't do it again, he murmured. The kid looked at him, his eyes complicated, and whispered something softly. Yi Qingxian tilted over to hear what he had to say. The kid took a deep breath, grabbed his ears, and screamed, "Not your business." Like lightning striking the ground, Yi Qingxuan's mind was blank for a moment. The kid suddenly jumped up from the ground, bitterly stepping on the back of Yi Qingxian's foot. He fled as fast as he could. Yi Qingxian subconsciously reached out, but only caught a knitted hat in his hands. The kid was gone. Old Phil was gloating on the side, panting with its tongue sticking out, showing no signs that it was going to chase the kid. Yi Qingxian was also stunned. He stared at the empty alley, remembering the kid's reflection while she ran away. He grabbed her hat, her long silver-white hair falling off of it like silver stars. That was a girl. Yi Qingxian looked down at the hat. After a while, he sighed softly and stuffed it into his pocket. That's really bad luck. I finally found someone from my hometown, but it had to be here. Half an hour later, the original pub was in a mess. Two bulky men stood guarding the front and back of the pub, arms crossed, coolly staring at anyone who dared to get close. Each man had a dagger branded with a silver emblem peeking out of their belt. The passers-by sped up their pace, trying to avoid them. In the pub, everyone was lying on the ground, or more specifically was beaten down to the ground. Only an old man was sitting in a chair, silently smoking a pipe. The bartender, who had hidden behind the bar, was now tied to a pole, his face bloody. He was moaning in pain. In front of him, a half-naked man still kept going, punching his face like a hammer. The fists were already covered in blood. Okay, Marvin, stop. The old man with a pipe waved his hands. He looked at the bartender who was barely breathing. Jason, I know you are a tough guy, a good guy. Every month, you always pay the shaman well, so I did not break your neck like I did everyone else. But you have to tell me the truth. Where is the kid that gambled here? He escaped, and I swear, I do not know him. The bartender could barely open his mouth, his teeth about to fall from his mouth. I know you do not know him. The smoking old man sighed. Tell me something I haven't heard, otherwise I cannot make a report. I really do not know. Someone saw him run away with another kid. No one has seen them since. A kid. Avalon is full of damn kids. The smoking man frowned. Do you want me to dig each one of them out to question them? Someone saw him. He was an Easterner with a dog. The bastard begged, Mr. Ghost Hand, this is all I know. In Mr. Shaman's name, I dare not lie, please just let me go. Another Eastern kid. What a day, it's really worrisome. The smoking man grunted, waved his hand, and gestured for Marvin to walk away. He got up and patted Jason's shoulder. Thank you for your honesty, my friend. Mr. Shaman will pay you for your loss today. He kicked aside the broken table, and turned to the corner. You see, Mr. Chang, our people are not with the kid you are looking for. At the corner, where the light could not reach the darkness, a thin figure walked out. It was an old man from the east, wearing a seemingly cumbersome and luxurious robe, with hair as white as any ordinary aging man. His eyes were sharp. He had no presence when he stood in the corner. Mr. Chang kept his hands in his sleeve. His face, covered with age spots, was expressionless. The shaman assured us that he would find him. Yes, yes, shaman said to find him. We will find him and return him to you without a single strand of hair lost. Maybe we'll also do a buy one, get one free deal with the other white-haired kid, but you've got to give us a little time. I will, Mr. Chang said dimly. He took a step back and disappeared into the darkness. Ghost Hand watched him disappear. He sighed after a long time. Damn, that's trouble. Notify everyone and tell them to work harder. Find him. Outside the door, someone who worked for him walked in and whispered, Mr. Ghost Hand, Mr. Shaman has a few words for you. What is it? He also wants you to find a missing person. It's for another group we cannot refuse. Deep sh*t. Ghost Hand scratched his white hair. D*mn, we're gangsters, not a nursery. Who is it this time? A kid from the east, with a dog. Ghost Hand held back an impulse to spit out blood. Let me guess, there will be someone else who'll ask us to find a dog. Having wasted a whole afternoon, Yi Qingxian finally finished following the road as complex as a spider's web and found the north side of the city. When the bell rang from a distant church, it was already dusk. In the square where people came and went, Yi Qingxian sat on a bench next to the fountain, tired. He looked at the tall building not too far away with a sense of satisfaction on his face. The Royal Academy of Music. I have finally found you. He smiled. Chapter 22 The Invitation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Old Phil, don't run. In the hotel bathroom, Yi Qingxian pushed the crazy old Phil into the bathtub, trying to clean the layers of mud off of it. Old Phil turned around and bit Yi Qingxian, but he remained determined as ever. He poured half a bottle of the hotel bath soap onto Old Phil, and added a few tablespoons of detergent until the dog was about to be drowned by bubbles. No one knew how long this old dog had not taken a bath, as Yi Qingxian also brushed out several small hairpins, not knowing who had put them there. When the dirty water in Old Phil's fur had almost completely clogged the drain, Yi Qingxian finally stopped and nodded, finally satisfied, that's how it's done. In front of the mirror, Old Phil sluggishly looked at itself. It whined a little, too sad to continue looking. This golden-haired dog with luscious fur suddenly stood up, raised its paw and skillfully slapped Yi Qingxian. Then it sat in a corner and refused to move. Under the afternoon sunshine, the tips of its fur glowed with golden highlights. They was so elegant and beautiful, making it a totally unrecognizable dog compared to that dirty one before. But why did it love being dirty? No one knew what the dog was thinking, as it was sad despite being so beautiful now. Old Phil squatted in the corner, sadly bowing its head. It would be perfect if Old Phil could hold a glass of wine, and recite some poetry to express its sadness. Do not be sad, Old Phil. Yi Qingxian squatted and tried to comfort it. You see, if you are dirty, I have no way to take you to come with me to the entrance exam. Old Phil was still unresponsive. I discovered that before the entrance exam this year, the Royal Academy of Music will have a reception banquet. So tonight you can follow me quietly into the kitchen, and you can eat as much as you want. Yi Qingxian predicted Old Phil's selfish desires. Old Phil, it's the Royal Academy of Music's banquet. Whale's sausage will certainly be unlimited. As soon as Old Phil heard the word sausage, its tail started wagging, and its eyes shone. And maybe there will be seafood, meat and endless stargazing. Stargazing. Immediately Old Phil stared at him very seriously. Yi Qingxian realized what he had just said, and tried to make it better. Okay, we don't eat that. Just the sausage should be enough. The bread is not the stale kind, but is soft like cotton candy. Old Phil nodded, then opened its mouth and stuck out its tongue as if saying, "That would be satisfactory. There is seafood, scallops, and lobster, this big." Yi Qingxian stretched out his arms wide. Ruff, ruff. Old Phil was so excited, and flew into Yi Qingxuan's arms. It patted his shoulder, full of gratitude, as if it had begun to see that its little follower had grown up and could now take care of him. Don't open your mouth. Yi Qingxian was happily rolling with old Phil on the ground. In the end they both were tired, lying on the dirty floor. The sun shone through the window onto the teen's white hair. It glistened like flowing mercury. Yi Qingxian spaced out while looking outside the window. The messy streets, the blue sky with white clouds. In silence, he suddenly gave a silly smile. "Old Phil, I will become a musician soon." The setting sun shone through the clouds like flowing water, brilliant and beautiful. A ray of sunshine fell from the sky and shone on the top of the palace. White towers stood high, the golden, glistening griffin flag fluttering in the wind. The light from the top of the palace reflected upon its surroundings evenly, illuminating the three-ring city. Everything was rendered with a layer of an enchanting golden hue. Dancing white fog shrouded the city below, huge waves appeared to cover the whole town from there, the shadow of the white church could only be seen vaguely, becoming blurrier as the distance increased, yet the sound of the tide could be heard from afar. This was the era that the nobles were bathed in the light, while the ordinary civilians looked up to witness the glory. Outside the iron gate, Yi Qingxian was holding old Phil and looked up in awe. Behind the tall walls, layers of old trees covered the entire school area, faintly revealing a peak of the auditorium and the corner of the bell tower. The ancient college exuded a peaceful atmosphere, with people quietly coming and going. 200 years ago, when the school was built, the architect had placed solemn monuments in every place. The doors slowly opened. Years of history blew through the door, fascinating people. "Old Phil, let's go." Yi Qingxian finally recovered from spacing out, waved at old Phil, walked into the school, full of excitement. "Are you here to attend the banquet?" asked an old gatekeeper. He wore a short cloak and held a short staff. He looked down at the excited child, and the excited old dog, then nodded his head and ushered him in. Watching the boy happily run away, he laughed. He propped up his chin on the short staff and went back to sleep. In front of the auditorium, there was already a group of people gathered. At the front door, two polite waiters dressed in black opened the door for the guests with respectful and flattering smiles. "Earl Wellington, long time no see. Is this your daughter?" Just at the main entrance, the host wore a tuxedo, trying hard to look dignified. But to many people, he really looked like a penguin. He bent over to salute the aristocratic man and his daughter. "The dean has been waiting for you for a long time. Please come in. Mr. Czerny, I haven't seen you for a long time. Is your global travel coming to an end? We are looking forward to seeing your new work." He pointed to the arrogant boy beside the man, then nodded and started praising him. "Your son has reached the age of admission. Wow, he looks so handsome and smart. Please come in." He took the invitation and moved on to the next person. He prepared to say something but the arrogant elite teen brushed past him. The servant handed him the invitation and hurried off. Sydney's face twitched, not revealing any ugly look. He just smiled. Most of the candidates invited to the banquet had aristocratic backgrounds, many of whom were also the children of musicians. Out of the spite and worry towards the school's growing number of peasants, the aristocratic musicians who held this dinner wanted to pick out the noble blood among all the candidates. The current principal, who was not of noble heritage himself, had extended the dinner banquet to all the candidates, agitating the aristocratic committee. The original elite banquet was turning into a flea market. Looking at the crowd filled with many peasants, Sydney turned bitter. How many more of these people will come? "Sir, the representative from the Ackerman family had arrived," the servant said softly. "He is the son of Mr. Leon. You should have told me earlier. Sydney saw the carriage in the distance. His eyes suddenly shone. The Ackerman family was one of the most important guests at the banquet. Leon, as a famous musician in the kingdom, was an important figure that the aristocratic factions wanted to be close with. During this critical occasion, he must not be neglected. But as Sydney stepped forward, a big dog arrogantly strode past him, proudly raising his head up, even sneering at him. That kind of ridiculous pretentiousness really aggravated him. He started screaming, "Wait! Whose dog is this? Someone get it out. I have said so many times, don't let wild dogs into the school." "Oh, sorry, that's my dog." Next to him, there was a teen by the waiter. He raised his hand awkwardly. Sydney looked down at him and saw his clothes, realizing that he was another one of these peasant musicians. Eventually, the prestige of the Royal Academy of Music would be defiled by these dirty commoners, turning the school to garbage. "Professor, there is a problem," the attendant whispered. "This gentleman came to attend the dinner, but he is not on the list." Sydney frowned and slowly reached his hand out toward Yi Qingxian. Yi Qingxian hesitated, but shook his hand anyway. "Hello." Sydney's eyes became more contemptuous. He brushed away Yi Qingxuan's hand, asking him slowly, "Invitation letter? All candidates have invitations." "Oh, what about letters of recommendation?" Yi Qingxian started shrinking. "What recommendation letter? I don't know what you are talking about." Sydney looked at the musician Leon walking toward him. Suddenly he became anxious and increasingly impatient. "Go away. Do not waste my time." Yi Qingxian was stunned and confused. "Sir, could you check again? There certainly should be one." "No." Sydney did not even look at the list and pushed him away. "Go away." "Wait, wait." Yi Qingxian was stunned, and unconsciously pulled Sydney toward him. "There must be something wrong. My recommendation letter should have been sent to you already. I am from the East. My name is Yi Qingxian. I was recommended by Mr. Wolf Flute." "I said no." Sydney took Ye's hands off of him. "There was no letter of recommendation sent to the college in the past few days. And I have not heard of Mr. Wolf Flute. But stop talking, you brat. This isn't the place for the nonsense, unless you want a visit to the law enforcements." He gave Yi Qingxian a dirty look, and patted the corner of his clothes that Yi Qingxian had pulled, as if there was some dirt on it. Sydney quickly changed his sour look into a smile, trotting toward the well-dressed man. Mr. Leon, do you remember me?" "I am." Yi Qingxian stared at his back for a long time, then whispered, "Impossible." He looked at the door open again and again, with the dressed up boys and girls walking into the glow of chandeliers. Old Phil came back from the bushes, dropped 2 coins next to Yi Qingxuan's foot, then looked up at him. But old Phil could see the smile on the young face slowly fade little by little, turning into an expression of loss and fear. "Impossible," he said softly. "Is there something wrong?" Old Phil tilted its head to look at him. "They must have made a mistake." Yi Qingxian squatted beside old Phil, biting his lips. "Let's wait and see. Maybe the letter will come in a little while." But when the dinner was about to start, the letter had not arrived yet. Chapter 23. Position. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Before Yi Qingxian came to Avalon, Wolf Flute had promised him that his letter of recommendation would be sent to the school, allowing him to take the exam. But now Yi Qingxian was at a loss because everyone told him that there had been no sign of the letter anywhere. The banquet had already begun. He was waiting with old Phil at the door, but had no idea how much longer they would have to wait. Some distance away by the entrance, Sydney was still wandering anxiously. Still not here. The dinner is about to start. Sydney frowned and looked at his pocket watch. When he saw the young man wandering nearby, he became even more irritated. Why is he still here? Someone, take him. Halfway through his sentence, he heard a carriage coming from afar. With handsome black horses pulling it, the luxurious carriage quietly parked in front of the hall. Sidney's face suddenly lit up, and he walked quickly to the carriage. Yi Qingxian turned around and looked hopefully at the carriage. He was hoping to see a messenger step out, and gave him his very late letter of recommendation. But a messenger cannot afford such a carriage, a voice whispered in his heart. Do you see the gold-plated handle on the door? A messenger working together with you for a whole year wouldn't be able to afford such a thing. The carriage slowly came to a stop, and the door was pushed open. The person who stepped down was no messenger, but a well-dressed young boy. His face was pale as if he had not seen the sun for a long time. His eyes were cold and arrogant. Master Banner. Sidney wiped off his sweat and went up to greet the boy. Why are you so late? Left a bit late. The blond young man put his hand on Sidney's arm to get out of the carriage. He quickly looked at the hall and remarked, the dinner isn't over yet. It'd be better if you had come earlier, of course, Sidney said laughing. He said softly, you are only 16 years old, and are already spoken of highly by Mr. Xuanhuan. Your brother is already the concertmaster of the seniors. If the Adrian family produces another concertmaster, the influence from this generation will certainly be beneficial to the family. I know, so here I am, Banner answered casually. You have nothing to worry about, I have already made the arrangements. Sidney lowered his voice, once the president finishes with his speech, your solo will be next. No other candidate can compete with you. This is the first step to establish your reputation, and then I will. Oh, you've worked hard. Banner walked ahead expressionless, as if it had nothing to do with him. When he saw Yi Qingxian standing not far away, he frowned. Who is he? Some kid from downtown, no one significant. Sidney did not even look at Yi, and only urged Banner to walk faster. The president arrived a while ago, let's not keep him waiting. Banner nodded, and looked back at the boy in front of him. Excuse me, you are in my way, please let me pass. Until now Yi Qingxian had not even realized that was blocking the young man. He was pushed aside by Sidney before he could react. He staggered, but silently let him through, saying nothing. Banner saw his clothes and seemed to have understood something. His eyes became friendlier. Do not wait here. It is not a place for a servant. Do not cause your master any trouble. Yi Qingxian opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but nothing came out. Banner looked away, and walked into the lively dinner hall. Yi Qingxian was silent. After a long time he looked down. He had wanted to say that he was not a servant, but compared to those rich and noble young men, he may as well have been. He was no longer a young master, nor did he have the letter, so what was the point of sticking around? He did not know what he was thinking, only that he was ridiculous. He shook his head and waved his hand at old Phil. Come on, old Phil. He said softly, we are going home. Why are you here? When they got to the middle of the street, a man ran up to him, breathless. The middle-aged man was wearing a black school worker's uniform, and seemed surprised for a moment. Come with me, Bov, what? Yi Qingxian was dumbfounded. Aren't you the new guy? Didn't you know to wait at the back door? Why did you come here? He did not give Yi Qingxian a chance to speak and grabbed him. Don't just stand here, we are going to be late. Yi Qingxian was stunned for a moment. You were looking for me. Of course, who else would I be looking for? The middle-aged man grabbed him, and made their way to a house. Yi Qingxian knew something was not right. There were many servants in the house getting dressed. When they saw him, none of them seemed surprised, or said anything at all. One of the servants who was dressed saw the man come in and smiled. John, you found him. This guy went to the front entrance, not sure why. It was rather troublesome. John waved his hand and gave Yi Qingxian a uniform. Hurry up, the kitchen needs people. The kitchen. Yi Qingxian blankly looked at the uniform in his arms, and suddenly understood. He felt depressed all of a sudden. He forced a smile, but it looked like he was crying. Do I really look like a servant? 5 minutes later, the white-haired kid with a uniform carried plates and fixed his tie in front of the mirror. Well, he did somewhat look like a servant, not. Along the way, he could not help being pushed forward by a variety of people. Before he knew it, he was already at the kitchen. The kitchen was crowded with people coming and going. Hurry, table 4 ran out of fruit platters. Does anyone know where champagne is? We ran out of fruit, what do we do? Why did you buy so many sausages? Damn, the stupid guy in charge of purchasing mixed up the forms. He wrote the fruit's price in the sausages. And wait, whose dog is this? Kinda cute. Come over and let me see. In the kitchen, the cook who was waving the purchase forms and cursing stopped when she saw old Phil. She went up to pet it. Old Phil's eyes were only focused on the sausages. It did not even bite at her touch, only drooling for the sausages. Oh, do you like sausages? The cook smiled at old Phil's greedy look, picked up 2 sausages, and carefully placed them in front of it. Old Phil jumped over and began to eat feverishly. The cook carefully patted old Phil on the back, and suddenly exclaimed, "Ah, look, so soft. I can pet it." A group of girls helping out in the kitchen suddenly took notice. They came together. "Ah, I want a pet too. Yeah, it's soft, like a cushion. So cute." Yi Qingxian was standing on the side, speechless. He wanted to ask them, "Are you blind?" Old Phil used to dominate the town of Loot. Children would cry whenever he gave them a stare. Whose dog is this? How come I have never seen it? The cook asked after she was done petting old Phil. That. Yi Qingxian raised his hand, is mine. The cook was surprised to see him. Who are you? Isn't he the new guy from your kitchen staff? Said John. You idiot, this is an Easterner. The cook pointed at Yi Qingxuan's white hair. Where did you find him? John was dumbfounded. Never mind, I came to look for a job anyway. Yi Qingxian quickly raised his hands, easing John's embarrassment. He sighed. It seemed that the Royal Academy of Music was no longer a possibility, but at least he could fulfill his promise to old Phil. He gave old Phil, who was enjoying his food, a quick look. He shook his head and sighed, as long as you are happy. The cook gave him a look and also shook her head, never mind, the other guy must have left because the pay was too low. Why don't you work for the night? I will pay you after. If you work hard, maybe you can stay. Yeah. Yi Qingxian chuckled. What is the kitchen doing? Why so slow? Outside of the kitchen someone had asked loudly, are the truffles and caviars not ready yet? Ready. The cook quickly began to work, and signaled for Yi Qingxian to help. Just when Yi Qingxian rolled up his sleeves, someone walked in. The manager came in sweating like a pig. Do you have extra hands in the kitchen? We need someone up front. I can't help you, boss. The school hasn't started yet, and the workers are still on vacation. The school committee suddenly told me to hold a banquet. We got as many people as we already could. Forget it, we need people in the front. You, come with me. The manager pointed to a few people, and finally pointed at Yi Qingxian, and you. What? Yi Qingxian was stunned. In the hall, the crystal chandelier on the ceiling emanated a soft light, illuminating the wide space with no glare. The master's portraits were hanging on the white walls. Even the stones on the floor were carved with a faint flowery pattern. Everything looked exquisite and solemn. The band was playing some soothing music. It was a very relaxing atmosphere. The elderly were gathered together, deliberately leaving the young ones with more time and space. The young ones tended to gather in groups of 3 or 5, holding a glass of wine and talking quietly. On the three long tables were a variety of untouched, exquisite dishes. Only the cold dishes and appetizers were occasionally visited. In this pleasant atmosphere, the white-haired kid stood in the corner as if he did not exist. He was holding a tray, eyes staring at all the glasses held by the guests. As soon as someone's glass was empty, Yi Qingxian would emerge out of nowhere with a tray. With a voice so soft it would give someone a chill, he politely asked, "Sir, would you like a glass of champagne?" Many people were startled by his sudden presence, but Yi Qingxian did not care, thinking, "I already poured your wine, what's there to complain? You are lucky I didn't spit in it." In his boredom, he began to appreciate the oil paintings hanging in the hall. The paintings seemed to have been done by someone famous. The portraits were lifelike, each with its own spirit and grace, like a real person were standing in front of him. Anyone could easily see that the subjects of the paintings were the grand masters among the countless musicians. The 12 Uncrowned Kings. Chapter 24 Performance. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The 12 musicians in the paintings depicted the 12 great masters of the Western world. The three portraits in the forefront were the three kings named after the impressive and glorious Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, followed by other gurus like Chopin, Haydn, and Brahms. In addition to their extraordinary abilities, these big musicians inherited their names from the saints of the Dark Age, who were also in charge of terrifying power and technology. Because of the country's confidentiality policies and the master's wishes, some of their abilities were unknown. For example, Mr. Haydn, the one who was permanently stationed in the sacred city, secretly guarded the sheet music considered taboo, Genesis. The last time Genesis was played was 40 years ago. The phenomenal natural catastrophe called Holy White Storm, from the tip of the Northern Sea, invaded human countries. It had completely flattened half of the land and the population. This was followed by an invasion of beasts which completely destroyed one of the countries. Mr. Haydn had then led the holy choirs to the northern wall, where the power of Genesis took out all the ether within a 1,000-mile radius, completely defeating it in one swoop. The power of the irresistible force was beyond any ordinary person's imagination. It got into the fertile plains, turning them into burning lava. Moen Mountain had been turned into a huge valley by the exhaustive power. With hundreds of millions of tons of water coming in, most of the plains had sunk into the ocean forever. It was still a wetland. The wealthy city had completely vanished, only leaving skeletons under the sea. The power was miraculous and could not be controlled by the call of humans. When the power of the weapons was too strong, it did not matter who won or lost, because it led to extreme loss and tragedy on both sides. Although there were two musicians who had inherited from Chopin and Brahms on the border of the Anglo Kingdom and the Burgundy Kingdom, they had never fought against each other before. It was said that in the East, the musicians of the powerful imperial 9 musicians were so strong that they could not even control their own power. They could not stay in one place for a long time. Otherwise a disaster would follow known as Armageddon. A well-deserved icon of the Western musicians named King of Black, Bach, permanently lived in the dark world, opening up the land for mankind. After inheriting the holy name, he never returned to the hinterland of the civilized world. And the people of the generation, in the succession of inheriting the name King of Red. Beethoven simply lived in seclusion in the sacred city. All educational affairs were given to the cardinals. Beethoven's mind was devoted to the guarding the abyss mission. As for the King of Yellow, Mozart, he had been missing for many years. No one knew where this genius was. The 12 portraits represented the 12 giants. But 4 portraits were still missing, which meant that no one was entitled to those names yet. Looking at those blank portraits, Yi Qingxian felt a little bit sad. If that even did not happen, that man would probably be one of them. Your Royal Highness, Mary, I did not expect you to come. I am quite surprised. In the corner, an old white-haired man saluted the blonde girl in the front of him. The girl nodded back. She had a slender neck and looked dignified with soft beauty. She wore a blue dress, with her hair in a simple bun behind her ear. She did not look like a girl going to a banquet, but more like a girl walking in the park. "This is not a formal meeting. Please don't be too serious, Mr. Principal." The girl's voice was very gentle. She looked around with admiration. "I came to handle other matters, but I saw this admission dinner and decided to attend, feeling that many students will be the pillars of the future." She was almost as old as these students, perhaps even younger, but she seemed superior when she spoke. "Just a group of children, who knows what they'll do in the future." The old man shook his head emotionally, "But every time I see them, I always feel that I am getting old." He sighed, "Honestly, I have been scared 3 times already by a waiter today. I will go and ask the supervisor whether they recruited a Persian assassin to work in the school." "You are exaggerating." Mary could not help but chuckle softly, "But I'd love to see the person who scared the principal 3 times. At this point, the gentle band music gradually stopped. Most of the commotion in the hall had returned to silence, and everyone looked towards this corner, puzzled. Based on the schedule, it was time for the principal's speech, but the principal was not willing to step on stage. He stood in place, not moving and just sipping his champagne. "Principal, your speech," Sydney whispered to remind him. "Sorry, I don't feel well today. Let's not have a speech today." He looked at the stunned Sydney. "Maybe you can go up and say a few words." Sydney was surprised for a moment. "Maxwell, you initially wanted to." "Oh, don't be too rigid. How could you take my random idea seriously? Plus, I hate advising people. What if I say something inappropriate?" Maxwell waved lightly. Skip it, let's move on. Did you say that there was a young man here praised by Master Xuanhuan? Let's request a piece. Music please. I like the sound of the piano." Sydney was speechless. He felt that the school board and himself had been played by this guy once again. It was like watching a strong enemy raise his palm, anticipating him to strike, then watching him gently put his hand down. Although there was no slap, it still made people upset. But what could he do? All the people who hated him so much had no way to deal with him because he was Maxwell, the guardian of the blood of Anglo, the ruler of the Royal Music Academy. He had shown off from a young age, never giving anyone respect, nor caring about others' opinions. He did whatever he wanted, not afraid of messing up. It was arbitrary chaos, he never cared about consequences too much. For decades, he firmly occupied the seat in the parliament and the supreme hegemony of the school, ignoring even the Queen's order. Obviously he was from a noble family, but he had offended almost all of the families, and was even absent from 3 consecutive roundtable meetings. Sydney sighed, next. This was the best solution. At least he did not need to worry that there was something wrong with Maxwell's speech. Moreover, this was the committee's special arrangement for Banner. It was rather better without Maxwell's involvement. In order to cultivate the younger generation, the Adrian family donated a large sum to the aristocracy committee. Just thinking of it, Sydney's heart felt warmer, his fists clenched. It all depended on Banner now. Under his expectant eyes, a blonde teen walked onto the stage quietly, standing in front of the piano. In the public's attention, he slightly bowed. His eyes swept across the whole audience, then sat down silently. His hands settled on the keys, and slowly pressed down. It was like the sound of broken crystals. Crisp reverberation from the keys resounded in everybody's ears. Maxwell squinted his eyes and gazed up. He whispered, "Pretty good." In the quiet atmosphere, the notes echoed in the air. They rippled in all directions, colliding with each other, resonating in the air. The gentle sound spread through the banquet hall, filling every inch of space in the big hall, like a soft wind blowing into every corner. The music gradually increased just as the proliferation of silk, intertwining with everybody's breath. It subtly lingered in everyone's ears. The music became more intense, transforming into a loud echo. Suddenly the notes burst. The deep piano sound pressed down on everyone's heart, as if a flowing river had suddenly frozen and burst. This was one of the many marches spread around the continent, but it was the favorite progressive format used by the school of modifications, different from the fugue format. It could be gentle at the beginning, but the notes must be continuous. Like a gentle veil was thrown, it evolved into a frenzy of brazen bursts. Only a few people could play a piece so dense. The notes jumped back and forth between each part like an urgent storm, giving people no time to breathe. What was once soft music now brought strong shocking senses, making it impossible for anyone to gain their footing in the frenzy. Thoughts and feelings were swept away in the waves, distancing themselves. The last note abruptly ended. The perfect melody slowly disappeared into silence. In the quiet banquet hall, there was only the candidates' astonished gazes and heavy breaths. Banner got up silently, bowed, and left the stage. After a long time, applause erupted like a storm. "Well done," Sidney whispered happily, almost dancing. He readily pulled the young waiter next to him, grabbed the champagne bottle from his hand and slowly poured himself a glass, feeling relieved after finished it. He wiped the sweat on his forehead, but felt something was wrong. With a puzzled expression, he looked at the waiter next to him. "Have I seen you before?" Yi Qingxian slightly shrugged, his white hair hidden in the hat. Sidney looked away and put the champagne back into Ye's hand. "Do not be lazy, work hard." Yi Qingxian carried the plate away. If the bastard found out he had snuck in, he might ask the attendees to beat him. Then it would be impossible to get some sausages for old Phil. The kitchen was still filled with bangs and clangs. Yi Qingxian returned. He was pulled to wash the bowls and dishes. Soon, he heard John and several busboys talking about the performance in the banquet hall. "What an outstanding performance!" The waiter said. "I almost dropped the plate. It was shocking. I could not even breathe. I never heard a student play that well. What a pity. I was busy at the time." The cook wiped her hands on her apron and looked depressed. "That fat vice principal, the fat man just came to check how the fruit plates were arranged. I didn't know what he was thinking. Otherwise I would have gone and listened to it too." Yi Qingxian heard their discussion next to them. Puzzled, he asked, "It's just playing the piano. What was the big deal?" The cook and John looked at him, shaking their heads and sighing. "Kid, you will understand when you grow up." The cook ruffled his hair with her greasy hand and sighed. "Us commoners can only listen to the street band's performance and the piano performance in the taverns. If I don't work here, I would have no hope of listening to someone play the piano in my life. What a pity I could not listen to it, you guys." The cook grumbled with regret. "Well, it was initially my turn to go inside the hall today. Actually I can play the piano a little if you want to listen to it." In front of the sink, Yi Qingxian tapped the plates with his knuckles. "I can play it for you." Chapter 25 Where Joy is Won. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the hall, the song was over. With a round of applause and cheers, the girl who had been listening quietly turned to look at the old man sitting beside her. "What do you think, Principal?" "Not bad." Maxwell seemed quite pleased. "Only not bad." The girl blinked her eyes in surprise. "Your Highness is putting me in a very difficult position." Maxwell shook his head and smiled. "The music, good or bad, really depends on the performers and the audience's heart. From what I heard, his performance was very skillful. This is a kid who's worked very hard. He isn't here just because of his family." "Why is it just not bad then?" "Probably because his performance was missing an element of joy." "Joy?" "Yes, Your Highness. Joy is the essence of music. Life is painful without joy, not to mention as is music," Maxwell explained. "Isn't music a serious matter?" Maxwell laughed. "Forgive me, but have you ever been to a pub?" Mary thought for a moment, then shook her head regretfully. "No." "That's a pity, you should go," Maxwell said. I know a good pub. The decoration is okay, not many tables either, and the owner had a bad temper, but it had good wine. When he gets drunk, the owner would take the tricord, and jump on the stage to play. Once he gets to the exciting part, he'd sing and dance, even if he plays terribly. But nobody listens to him because all the guests are drunk by then. But even though they're drunk and asleep, it's still joyful to hear music like that. So that's what joy means. Mary seemed to have understood. Something like that, said Maxwell. He started to laugh suddenly. Sorry, I'm lecturing again. It comes with my job. Not at all. If you, the principal, would be willing to teach me, I would not mind studying at your school. The girl grinned. Oh please, I do not have the strength to take on another apprentice. Maxwell smiled wryly. Now, your highness came so suddenly today, what exactly for? Just to make fun of this old man. Well, it's a long story. With that, the girl's expression became somewhat helpless. Yesterday, Uncle sent me a letter from the North Wall. It's for you, principal. Your uncle. Maxwell became serious. Is he back? He just wrote a letter and expedited it to you. He even used the wind tunnel. There was a loud noise last night and this letter was just thrown onto the table. The guards had thought that there was an assassin. To be honest, I am very curious what is so important for that psycho to write me a letter. Maxwell took the letter from the girl and opened the letter. He was silent for a long time. After a long time, he looked up and smiled. Your Highness, your letter came a bit too late. Too late. Mary was shocked and uneasy. Is it an urgent message? No, it's nothing urgent. But for some people it's probably more important than anything else. Maxwell sighed and opened the letter. This is a letter of recommendation, Your Highness. The girl took the letter. Her expression turned to confusion, probably because she could not understand her uncle's abstract logic and wording. There were only 3 short lines of writing, one for letterhead, one with the content, and one to end the letter. He had not even bothered with the date. To Maxwell. Soon there will be a white-haired Eastern boy coming to you to take the exam, please accept. Johann Sebastian. I do not know how much money that bastard actually received to make him write this letter to me, but he has no concept of time. Your Highness, it is too late. That child might have been locked out already. The girl was silent for a moment. She lowered her head and pressed her lips together. This is my fault. It is that old bastard's fault. The principal rubbed her hair, verging on being impolite. Do not be sad. With that, he pulled over the fat guy who was passing by. Mr. Sidney was so excited. He felt like he was walking on clouds and he looked like a penguin happily flying. When he saw the serious principal, he was suddenly brought back into reality, instantly ready for duty. He first respectfully bowed to the girl, and then his eyes locked onto the principal, unsure what game the old man wanted to play. How can I help you, principal? Yes, Mr. Sidney, I want to ask you about someone. Maxwell put down the glass, and gestured the height of a teenager. Did you see a teenager while you were greeting the guests? He should have had no invitation. Ah. Sidney was surprised for a moment, but then a bad feeling slowly crept up on him. Well, he's an Easterner with white hair. Have you seen him? Was he with a dog? I do not know that. I guess you have seen him. Maxwell nodded. He saw Sidney's face and began to feel worse. Hey, Mr. Sidney, you drove him away. Sidney hesitated then nodded. He saw Maxwell's and the young girl's pitiful eyes. I can't believe it really is like this. Maxwell laughed, and then put his hands on Sidney's shoulders. He said seriously, it seems that I have misunderstood you in the past. I have always thought you could not bear any responsibilities. But today, you have completely changed my mind. But since you have admitted to this, are you willing to take the responsibility? Before Sidney became furious, he was stunned by the second half of his words. What was the old man playing at? He suddenly regretted that he had not been careful enough. That's my duty, sir. Sidney looked gloomy, and swatted the principal's hand. He did not have an invitation, nor was he on the list. Furthermore, he was dressed like a beggar. Did I do something wrong? He paused. Forgive me. I did see that little thug you asked about. That kind of trouble would only disrupt the banquet. I had to drive him away. I do not think that was a mistake. If you are dissatisfied with my work, you may report me to the committee, and I believe that the committee will make a fair judgment. But this is the Royal Academy of Music. It is not a place that anybody can just walk in. Sidney had thought that his last sentence was a stroke of genius. The principal must now be completely impressed with him. It was definitely a rare occasion. Sidney's eyes gleamed with pride. Huh, Maxwell laughed. You must be joking. Why would anyone go to the committee for this? After Maxwell had lost his last battle with the committee, he obviously did not dare to attack the committee again. Sidney sneered, then please be careful with your words. No, you misunderstood me. Maxwell sighed sympathetically. I mean that the committee cannot protect you. You. Before Sidney finished, Maxwell put the letter of recommendation in front of him. I hope you can still read, Mr. Sidney. After reading this, I hope you can still maintain your level of confidence. Sidney glanced at the letterhead. The name felt vaguely familiar, but he was not sure. Then his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Johann Sebastian. Sidney exclaimed in surprise. Maxwell nodded, yes. Which Sebastian? Sidney asked a silly question, but his bad feeling became even stronger. The principal sighed deeply. I have already said, to let someone who's not even a musician be a professor is not a very reliable decision. He pointed to the painting on the wall. Which Sebastian do you think? Who can be called uncle by Her Highness? The Sebastian who sells vegetables. The doorman Sebastian. Or the Sebastian whose picture is now hanging on the wall. Sidney suddenly felt very uneasy. He looked up and felt as if his head had been smashed with a big hammer. He understood, and it meant big trouble. He sluggishly stared at the skinny guy in the oil painting above, and could not help but twitch a bit. He thought someone must be playing a joke on him. Yes, that's him. The principal held his shoulder. He pleasantly clinked his glass, and saluted the painting. King of Black, the uncrowned king, the most powerful musician, guardian of men, the greatest explorer and musician, and my old friend. The one who is credited with the title of Bach, Johann Sebastian. The principal continued, so this guy is kind of great, right? How about that, aren't you glad or surprised? He winked at Sidney. You did give me a surprise today. You do know who the last person recommended by Sebastian was, right? Who? Who else could it be? It was that genius boy whose reputation was known to the world overnight, who won the crown of the King of Yellow and mysteriously disappeared right after. After a long time, Sidney finally recovered from his shock. He stared at the principal. I. Sidney swallowed his saliva. Seeing the girl's face turn sour, he felt like a fat penguin who had fallen into a pit of fire. Principal, Your Highness, that I can explain. He was about to cry, sweating like a pig. You have to hear me out. I did not, no, I was, he is, no, I mean. Please give me a chance to make it up. Maxwell shrugged indifferently and whistled, showing that there was nothing he could do. You cannot do that. Sidney was on the verge of breaking down. He lost restraint and grabbed onto the principal's collar. I have been awarded by the Academy for exemplary service. I bled for the Kingdom of Anglo. You cannot do this. I was only protecting the Academy. Is that wrong? It is a pity, but unfortunately every man here knows that. Maxwell whispered in Sidney's ear, you love the Academy, but the Academy doesn't love you. Sidney seemed to have lost all his strength. He stumbled back and muttered something incoherent. I will find him immediately. I will go looking for him now. His face was twitching. He pulled the manager over. Mike, now, get everyone together. And find me that white-haired Eastern boy. Sidney tightly clutched his shoulder. Go, run, understand. His eyes were red, and he kept muttering, I hope he has not gone far. I hope he has not gone far. I hope he has not gone far. Sidney was desperately praying, but saw the manager standing with a strange look on his face. Why are you still standing here? Sidney was furious. Go and look. White hair, Eastern. The manager asked quietly, is he also with a dog? Sidney grabbed him before he could even finish his sentence, grasping for the last straw. He almost wanted to kiss him. You saw. You saw him. You have seen the guy. Yes. The manager nodded uneasily, but with certainty. I saw this man. Thank God, the saints, Alibaba, hallelujah. Sidney was in ecstasy, almost cried out with excitement. He exclaimed, Where? Where? Take me there now. Ah. The manager looked at the principal and the girl standing beside them, and hesitated. What are you doing? Talk. Where is he? Sidney was about to cry. Be no calm. The manager struggled to find the words and finally answered helplessly. In our kitchen. Chapter 26 Where Joy is Too. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He is in our kitchen. The manager's answer felt like a machete had just cut Sidney's face. He continued, well, when I was there, it seemed that he was washing the pots and plates. The manager hesitated and begged softly, he worked very hard, sir. If he offended you in any way, please do not blame him. Maxwell was stunned, Mary was shocked, and Sidney was astonished. The Academy's hospitality is a little bit special, Mary said. After a long time, Mary quietly sighed. Fortunately, I never got a recommendation letter from my uncle, otherwise I would be sent to the kitchen as well. I am really quite curious to even think about it. After all, I have never done that kind of thing before. She clearly had a gentle tone, but her words stabbed Sidney, making his face turn white. Life really always gives me an unexpected surprise, Mary said. Oh, let's take a look at our guest who was driven away. What is he doing in the kitchen? Maxwell said with a grin. Sidney froze a moment, then hastened to catch up. He kept wiping off his cold sweat all the way, praying no more embarrassing things would happen. But just as they approached the kitchen, they heard a strange sound. It was a chaotic symphony. The sound of the utensils colliding, iron pots scraping, things dropping on the floor, and the overlap of the dozens of sounds formed the march that had just been played. Maxwell stopped, staring at the crowd gathered in front of the kitchen. They twisted, swayed, sang, immersed in the music. BL.net, what does this mean? He laughed softly, amazed and surprised. The first was a knife being beat on a bowl. The crisp sound was like a bell ringing, like the reverberation of the wind at nighttime. Although it had a familiar rhythm and beat, it was unique, full of a strange feeling of speculation. With the melody rising, the sound of the bowls fell into the rhythm like an invisible handyman making his effort to push the roundabout music notes to a higher level. The dog barked along with the noises which initially would have made people frown, but blended nicely with the rhythm of the tunes and drums. It was not a soft sound like drizzling rain, but more rough like lively events. It sounded like a carnival ground, like dense stomping sounds, and like heavy raindrops. On the streets of the carnival, cheers emerged, and people threw their hats into the sky. Hats of all colors started to come down, flying in the wind. Suddenly cheers burst into tears, like a flood had swept through the audience. The emotional high-pitched sounds resonated in the air. The shadows also shook with the rhythm, as if the shadow of a flame had also been hijacked by the carnival tune. But just at the most critical moment, the cheers paused, revealing a fatal flaw in the music which made Maxwell frown. It should not pause here, but it should continue rather than exposing the fatal emptiness. Then in the next moment, the silence was shattered by an extremely sharp sound. Bang! 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 It was breaking the barriers, breaking the rules. Someone was beating the wok strongly, but the sound roared like thunder, echoing in everybody's ears. This was the beginning of the celebrations. The night wind suddenly became hot and dense, making it hard to breathe. It felt like a rock had sunk to the bottom of the chest. People's blood started heating up, and the cheers roared. Senses and emotions were sucked into the frenzy like a flame burning in the wind. Breaking the inherent pattern, this strange music was pushed to a higher level. The method was rough enough to make people frown, but the effect was still incredibly good. Maxwell sped up and pushed through the crowd, only to see the juveniles back in front of the sink. His hands held a knife and a fork and his foot was stepping on the bottom of a dark pot. He was absorbed in the rhythm like nobody was around. To his side was a big golden dog barking excitedly, dangling a sausage in its mouth. A fork was tied to its tail, so that as the dog wagged its tail, the fork would hit the lid of a pot, making a crisp and sharp sound. In the kitchen, the waiters and the cooks applauded, dancing for him, singing with the melody. It was not like a dignified school, but a carnival pub. Everyone was drunk, so that in the candlelight, their faces were red and drunk, and smiling. Did I hear it wrong? Maxwell sighed softly, and he felt that he had an illusion as if he had seen his political opponent wearing a tutu and throwing kisses along the King's Avenue. I am afraid Bach, that bastard, would regret his letter of recommendation if he saw him play his piece like this. Although he was incredibly stunned by this absurdity, he could not help but want to applaud, and then did so without hesitation. The girl was shocked. But in her gaze, the old man was excited, getting ready to cheer. Oh, no way. I like this rhythm too much. Amid the cheers, the high-pitched tunes continued as if they were never ending. In the rippling air, all the dishes shook from the resonance. An unparalleled sense of power and indulgence filled the air. There was also a sense of joy from the breaking jars and plates. In the end, the wok underneath the boy's foot finally could not bear it anymore. After issuing one last high-pitched note, the wok cracked. The music ended. Suddenly the carnival came to an end, and the crowd cheered and applauded so loudly that they almost awakened the entire sleeping college. Maxwell gently clapped his hand, looking at the surprised girl. Every day there are new surprises. He smiled and said, "This is where the joy of life comes from, Your Royal Highness." Yi Qingxian was surrounded by the excited cook and the servants. "Where did you learn this? You're almost at the same level with other musicians." The cook excitedly squeezed Yi Qingxuan's face. My father taught me in a place called Hawaii." The white-haired teenager wiped the sweat off his head, and put down the rolling pin in his hand, panting. Then he heard a crisp sound. The wok under his foot cracked even more, and then completely into two pieces. Sorry, I ruined your pot." He suddenly felt embarrassed and picked it up. "I don't have to pay for this, right? It was shipped from Manchester. It seems like it was made with special material. It looks very valuable." The person next to him shook his head. "This pot usually costs about 5,000. Are you guys a corrupted shop? A pot is more expensive than a carriage." Yi Qingxian was in shock. He began to hate himself for using too much force. However, the crowd went quiet. All the people stared at the old man behind him. The old man bent over to pick up the broken pot, and tapped his fingers on it, breaking the silence with a crisp, sweet sound. "Yes, we're the biggest corrupt shop in Anglo, an exclusive one," the principal said. "Mr. Principal," someone whispered in the crowd. Maxwell smiled. "But because of the march you just ruined, I will not charge you for the pot." After he finished, he patted the boy's shoulder, indicating for Yi to follow him. Before going out, he turned and said to the rest of the audience, "Ladies and gentlemen, I was deeply touched by your love of music today. Since everyone is a music lover, you can come and attend the school's practice class. But just remember that you have to finish your work first." There was a silence in the crowd. "Well, goodbye, ladies and gentlemen." Finally, Maxwell waved gracefully, closing the door on the stunned school workers. In the silence of the hallway, Maxwell looked at the boy over and over, and looked at his dog several times as well. When Xuanhuan's whole body had goosebumps, Maxwell finally finished looking and held his chin, then sighed, "I do not understand why the guy wrote a recommendation letter for you." He shook his head and lamented, "Did he owe you a lot of money?" "He? Who?" Xuanhuan asked. "Mr. Wolf Flute. I did him some favors." "Wolf Flute. I remember him. He was the shame of the academy at that time, but I was very fond of him. I heard that he quit school and did not know where he was going." "I see now." Maxwell suddenly understood. He nodded and asked, "Your name?" Xuanhuan, the white-haired teen answered honestly. He pointed to the dog by his side. "This is Old Phil." Old Phil was gnawing the sausage. It returned Maxwell's gaze with a supercilious, arrogant, and cold glare which made Xuanhuan exceptionally ashamed. Maxwell also had some more questions. "Age?" 17. "You are not old enough to attend school yet, but it's okay since you have a letter of recommendation." Maxwell hammered his palm. "Well, remember to come to school early tomorrow to take the exam. If you can pass it, you can attend the school, but remember to pay the tuition. After all, recently I have been quite short of money," he rambled. He saw the dramatic change in the teen's expression from surprise to shock, and then to ecstasy. "Exam. I can take the exam." Xuanhuan almost rudely pulled him. "Entrance exam. You are not lying to me, right?" "Yes," said Maxwell. He firmly nodded, "If I were the examiner, you would not even need to take the exam." "Yeah, exam, Xuanhuan muttered, so excited he was about to dance. "As long as I pass the exam, I will be able to enter the college and become a musician." "I cannot guarantee that you will become a musician. I just collect the tuition." Maxwell did not care if he offended the boy. Xuanhuan was not listening at all. He was ecstatic, holding Old Phil and laughing, and ran off somewhere. Watching the teenager cheering away, Maxwell also laughed. Must be nice to be young and energetic again. The night was deep. He coughed a little and looked to the side. "Your Highness, how do you feel?" Mary put on a white shawl to protect her from the night's wind. In the dim street light, she looked graceful yet lost. After a long time she slowly shook her head. "I do not like him. I don't understand my uncle." "Just because you did not get your uncle's letter of recommendation." Maxwell had seen through her. "Only at this time, I feel that your Highness is still a little girl." Mary was furious and glared at him. "Mr. Principal, should I be offended?" "Huh, just consider me as a nonsensical old man. Please don't punish me. After all, there were a lot of people who wanted to attack me recently, giving me a headache. Do you worry about this?" "I need to worry about it a little. After all, the Secretary of State seemed to be convinced, and wanted to change the principal, so the politics is really annoying. The position of the examiner must be rotated between the aristocrats and musicians. Every time, I feel that Anglo's future is falling more and more. I feel that Anglo would be." "Mr. Principal, you seem to be saying something you should not say." The girl reminded him with a little anger, "Do I have to remind you why I came here tonight?" I know. Maxwell shrugged. "I know exactly why you were here tonight. I know it is hard for your Majesty. I can take a leave for a while if necessary. Well, it happens that I have new wine in Wellington's winery. It would be nice to go and give a taste." Unfortunately, I missed the Princess of Yunlo's dinner. I have been quite looking forward to seeing the Eastern beauty. Getting his assurance, the girl's angry expression dissipated after a few minutes. Mr. Principal, you are willing to sympathize with my mother's good intention. She will be very grateful. It was a worthwhile trip for me. She bent over and said goodbye. Before leaving, she saw the teen cheering in the distance on the street. She looked at him, her eyes full of mercy. She asked, Mr. Principal, although I do not know how he could warrant my uncle's letter of recommendation, in your view, so you think he can really pass the exam? I do not think it is impossible. The principal laughed mysteriously. The older one becomes, the more one is prone to reminiscing. I feel that I've seen him before, and if that is the case, he is at least worth looking forward to. After all, the miracles are part of the pleasures of life. Chapter 27 The Exam. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mr. Sidney, who had not slept all night, turned around in his office and watched the sun shine through the windows, his eyes bloodshot. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit came and politely knocked on the door. Ben was full of excitement. Sir, the principal has just taken the carriage and gone to Wellington. Disregarding the objections from the Ministry of Education, and at the risk of offending 5 or 6 big families, he still insisted on expelling McCain of the Cameron family. He now must pay the price. Mr. Sidney had expected this. The departure of the principal meant that the musician faction would remain silent in the next 2 months and that the elite faction would prevail, which would be a good thing. However, as one of the representatives of the Academy's nobles, he was not pleased at all. It's a pity for McCain. He was a good for nothing, but he was still the concertmaster, Ben said. He was found smoking mandala. He deserved it, Sidney said indifferently. This might have been arranged by his brothers or sisters to rid him of his right to his inheritance. In any case, the exam is now in our hands, sir. I will not allow the Royal Academy of Music to continue going downhill, said Ben. Temperament is the privilege of the bloodline of glory, and to see a group of shameless guys dare to appear in my class, I just do not feel comfortable. Of course, Mr. Sidney nodded. Because the elite faction now controlled the enrollment examinations, it would no doubt be a disaster for the commoner candidates, especially in a place like the Royal Academy of Music, where the noble bloodlines were concentrated, and many saw the commoners as threats. But this time, Mr. Sidney could not deal with a headache. Whatever you do this time, there is one person whom you must proceed with caution. So the Bach rumor is true. Although not many people knew, Ben had obviously heard about what happened last night. But because of its absurdity and weirdness, not many people wanted to believe it at all. I thought about it all last night, and it's not necessarily untrue. I even think that the bastard Maxwell must have already known but had kept it a secret just to make a fool of me. Mr. Sidney looked gloomy. I will not be present for this examination. No matter how many of them you dismiss, that Eastern little devil, you must deal with him carefully. Ben, do you understand what I'm trying to say? Do not worry. Ben softly laughed. The recommendation letter was just a recommendation to us after all. If he can't pass the exam, even Bach won't be able to say anything. Sounds like you are all prepared. We have carefully prepared the contents of the examination, in addition to a special segment. Everything is under control, sir. Then go, said Sidney, as he nodded with satisfaction. The school board will remember your contribution. This is what everyone of elite blood should do. Ben bowed, and closed the door behind him with a smile. Every time Yi Qingxian stepped into the Royal Academy of Music, he felt something special. It was like something was extracted from the air, something was missing. Like a saltwater fish swimming in fresh water, or a lizard from the mud coming to the desert, his breathing seemed a bit easier, but things did not feel the same as usual. He was unsure if it was good or bad. When he entered the school, it had seemed that he was the only one that felt this way. When he looked at others, they all seemed calm, as if they noticed nothing. Yi Qingxian twisted his neck uncomfortably, and continued walking ahead with the school worker's lead. Because today was a formal examination, he did not bring old Phil just in case someone thought he was cheating. Because of that, old Phil was extremely unhappy today. Please go this way. Up ahead, the school worker was guiding them through the huge school campus. Among the lush forest, buildings of each of the school factions vaguely appeared. On a long walk, one might feel lost. It was said that the whole school was designed by the artist Hermes over 100 years ago. The layout of the school districts and some of the structures had not changed within the past 100 years, and still left a strong touch of Queen Victoria's era. That short-lived era ended with the disaster brought on by the creation of the steam engines. Most of the designs were lost as well. Yi Qingxian was quite excited to see such ancient designs today. The line walked forward solemnly except for Yi Qingxian, who was looking around, sometimes whispering with excitement. Occasionally the noble students would look over, their eyes clearly showing the word country hick. Yi Qingxian just rolled his eyes back at them. Here is the public lecture hall. Please wait here and be patient. The school worker opened two heavy wooden doors and pointed to the wide space behind them. All the seats are posted with your name, and the teachers will be here soon to distribute the examination papers. Yi Qingxian sat down in his chair and looked around. Outside the window were the woods, the distant square, and the fountain that could be seen through layers of green. It must have cost a fortune to build this school. Even the dome above him was full of beautiful carvings. Yi Qingxian stared for a long time. Yet somehow, he felt a gaze from nearby. He turned around to look and saw a banner staring at him, no expression on his pale face. After a long time, he slowly turned away. Are elites all weird like this? Yi Qingxian muttered in silence. As time went by, someone finally came through the door and distributed the papers. The examination is 4 hours long. You are not allowed to whisper, cheat, hand in your paper in advance, or look around. Now, let the examination begin, the gloomy-faced man finished coldly. He turned away, not even giving the candidates a chance to ask questions. Before he left, he shut the thick wooden doors behind him. With the sound of the door closing, everyone seemed to be lost, not sure what the school was playing at. After a long silence, some of them gave up wondering and began the exam, followed by cries of astonishment. Yi Qingxian heard someone in front of him curse, and when he started the examination himself, he was shocked as well. Out of 6 pages, only 1 page was on grammar, music theory, and mathematics. 4 pages were essay questions. 4 full pages. Advanced questions which had nothing to do with basic music theories. The impact of the Church's reform over 100 years ago, on the Anglo system, the rise of the school of choir and its leading figures, briefly described the 7 questions raised by Hermes, the similarities and differences between Rune's grammar and the common language, St. Gregory's for big achievements, the 5 criteria of the choir. Up until the last page, it was completely blank. Did I get the place wrong? Is this the Trinity College? Some candidates were scratching their heads and making painful noises. Last night's crash studying on music theory and mathematics had been completely useless. Isn't the advanced mathematics supposed to be hardest part? I never studied Rune's grammar. Under the whispered complaints, Yi Qingxian clutched the paper and looked around with surprise. Had Wolf Flute done him an even bigger favor than he had thought? He grabbed his pen and felt uneasy. In the busy examination room, no one had even thought to look up at the grand dome. No one knew that above the dome, there was a group of people casually holding wine glasses, looking at their miserable expressions. On the 2nd floor of the lecture hall was a hidden floor. In a magnificent hall, the floor was completely transparent, like crystals. The proctors were sitting on the couch, and looked down at the movements in the examination room, also exchanging words with each other. It seems that this exam is very effective. Several proctors looked at each other and laughed. They watched everyone's sad expressions, and congratulated the one next to them, genius idea, Mr. Ben. Thanks. Ben nodded, proudly rubbing his mustache. He said with a smile, after all, the school of choir is also a part of what the musicians must know. If the commoners do not understand, they can't blame the others, right? The Royal Academy of Music is the most knowledge-intensive school in Anglo. Testing only advanced mathematics and basic music theory won't be comprehensive enough. Some people agreed. I suggest that in the future, examinations as well as classes should expand this segment. Religious study should remain an important part of education. Agreed. Then it's settled. Ben said, I will report back to the school committee. If all the families here are in agreement, even the principal cannot disagree. The proposal had passed. The exam is so difficult this time. What if no one answers correctly? Someone asked softly. The total number of candidates is 270. More than 100 idiots will be dismissed and will no longer be our concern. We just need to take care of the remaining 100 people. Yes. Religion is part of the noble family's education. Even if it is not the main subject, they won't be like the commoners, who know nothing other than how to praise the saints. The proctors looked at each other and laughed. Most of the children of the noble families began all aspects of education before their coming of age, including art, religion, and etiquette. They were much better off compared to the commoners who only had at most 2 years in public school and only knew some hymns. Once the scope of the examination went beyond the basic education, it would simply be a slaughter within the scope of the provisions. Moreover, it would be easy to find the big fish in the small pond. The final interpretation was in the hands of the proctors. As long as everything was tidied up, even the principal would not be able to say anything once he came back. Watching the group of blank-faced commoners, Ben could not help but laugh. During the long exam, someone pushed open the door, and sat quietly in the corner chair. The noble proctor's smile slightly retracted, and gave the old man a quick sneering look, then turned away. Ever since the noble faction won the upper hand, the musician faction had completely given up under the influence of the principal. In order to appear fair on the surface, the principal only assigned an inconspicuous teacher as the representative, just for show. Compared to the elites who wore expensive clothing, even with his meticulous hair, the old man's clothing was mediocre at best. He was very ordinary, and did not live up to the status of a musician. He sat silently in the corner, not saying a word, and just looked down at the candidates. The dark iron surface of his mechanical metal prosthetic, replacing his right arm, shone slightly. 4 fingers stretched silently. He watched with concentration like a child. Chapter 28. Everyone is a good person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. An hour had passed since they started the test. The examiners checked their own areas and students, and were very satisfied with the current progress. This year, the kid from the Adrian family did a good job, someone whispered in praise. In the silence of the examination room, Banner answered the questions on his test paper, emotionless, his pen flying effortlessly. It seemed that was not stressed about the difficult subjects on the test. In the end, he is from a well-educated family. Ben nodded. He deserves to be the next generation inherited from the age of darkness. Of course, he is also good at hunting and theology. It's not right, somebody said quietly. Someone else was aware of it too. His speed is too fast. Ha! That white-haired boy, what's he doing? Ben was surprised for a moment, watching the white-haired boy not far from him. In the gloomy examination room, the white-haired boy was so happy, almost dancing out of his seat. As if he had taken drugs, his eyes were glistening. He held the pen in his hand, writing at an incredible speed. It was so fast that the proctors could not see his hand moving clearly. Besides the first 2 pages, which he needed time to think about, he was racing through the rest of the test. The reform of the church swept by, the rise of the school of choir rushed by, St. Gregory's achievements, he had filled almost half the page without thinking. The only thing he spent a long time on was the question about runes and common grammar because he wrote at least 1.5 pages without stopping. It did not seem like a boy taking an exam, but rather a fox happily slipping into a chicken coop. Hey, what's going on here? Ben's face was gloomy and looking to the side. Noel Daren, I don't know. The teacher who had written the questions gulped. He must not be scared of the problems. Maybe he is answering them all incorrectly. This is not a political analysis. As long as it provides a full answer, he can get some basic points. The female examiner contemptuously glanced at the teen, and said coldly, if it's just chicken scratch, he cannot get any points. But what if he answered them all correctly, someone softly asked. Everyone's expression was gloomy. The white-haired brat was the target that they had been instructed to take care of. If he passed with ease, the vice principal would be upset. Breaking the silence, a man whispered, do not scare yourself. How could that untouchable little know any theology? Yes, I designed the exam in accordance with the difficulty level of teaching staff's guideline. A middle-aged proctor shook his head, they should not be too easy to answer. Even if it were an open book exam, there shouldn't be people who can easily pass. Do you think he's really writing down wrong answers? I think so. After hearing what others were saying, Ben's face eased up. He nodded, a messy answer will disqualify him. I bet the principal will not be able to say anything about it. He answered them all correctly, someone murmured from the corner. A white-haired old man looked up, his eyes hazy, his face stiff. Rather than mocking the nobles, he was stating a fact. He said, all the answers are correct. In the examination room, Xuanhuan's pen was flying like the wind, quickly sweeping through the subjects one by one. Now that he had come to the last question, the 7 guidelines of hymnists, this was the common question for singers, yet outsiders would have no idea. But these 7 criteria were regarded as part of the Reformation and recorded in the 6th chronicle of the history of the Church. It was considered as one of the biggest achievements of the 6th generation of Pope Louis. The rise and representatives of the school of choir. The answer to the question was just putting together the contents of some chapters from church music history and saints' biography. And in order to make sure that he did not miss anything, Xuanhuan even added a chapter from Praise 13. 7 questions made by Hermes. A century ago, Hermes's era was called the development of the art of the church. Almost all of the artists in that era were all devout believers. They simply made a significant contribution to the development of religious art. The 7 questions were officially recorded in the theory, and could be easily found in the book. As for the difference between runes and common grammar, Xuanhuan knew this well because Father Ban had made him a copyist for 3 years. The more Xuanhuan wrote, the more he could not help but want to laugh and dance. Good man. Everyone was a good person. It was so good to have a recommendation letter. While Xuanhuan was writing, his heart spoke to Wolf Flute, you were afraid I could not take the exam, and you must have found someone to change the examination questions, thank you. It was an unbelievable privilege. He answered it all, one of the proctors whispered. Yes, all the questions are done. Boolsh *T. Ben roared, interrupting his words. Everyone went completely silent. Ben was crazily pounding on the table, glaring at the dark face of the middle-aged man. What is going on here? Maybe he had peeked at the exam beforehand, the examiner answered timidly. Why did you assure me? Ben wanted to kick him. Can you tell me how the little devil is coming up with correct answers? He remembered the promise he had made to Mr. Sidney. He felt his internal organs twisting into one piece. He was livid. Maybe our exam was leaked. Under the intense pressure, the middle-aged examiner's brain began to search for answers. It seemed that he had realized that life-saving possibility. His pale face turned blood red. Someone must have leaked our exam to him. He's cheating. It seems that the people from downtown only know how to cheat. Some people sneered, or is he the student of the school of choir? Cheating. Ben's face relaxed a little. Are you sure? Of course, the examiner was angry, his eyes full of contempt. Based on his inferior status, how could he have had access to church classics? We need to punish him, another examiner suggested. Yes, to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Ben rubbed his palms, his eyes were dark. We do not need to continue the examination and give him. He did not cheat, the low voice came from the corner, interrupting Ben's words. The room was suddenly silent. Ben's expression became more and more miserable. The stiff old man just looked at the examination room, not noticing the change in the atmosphere around him, his eyes focused. His writing methods and writing habits are unique to the church. His ring finger holding the pen is also a unique way of writing, which is how the kind of special font changes could be seen in the church's announcement and clergy letters. He continued, you can see the calluses on his hands that only long years of writing could leave. He must have received training from the church. Maybe he is a clergy. Enough. Ben interrupted his words, livid, Mr. Abraham, pay attention to your words. There is no room here for your foolishness. The old man finally felt that the atmosphere was not right. He slowly closed his mouth and lowered his head, embarrassed. Under the cold gazes, he scratched his gray hair in shame with his prosthetic hand. Sorry, he whispered. Ben looked at him coldly, and ignored him. It's about time. Ben took a deep breath and opened a box on the side. Let's move on. The violin made of glass reflected light like a dream. Ben cradled the violin, holding the bow on the string. His voice was dripping with evil, now let them take a real exam. As the subtle music played, his eyes were cunning and demonic. In the examination room, Yi Qingxian hummed the praise poems. He finished the last question with the ease and grace of moving clouds and flowing water. Just after rechecking all his answers, he nodded with satisfaction. It was nearly perfect. If I do not seriously answer the questions, then I would disappoint all of the people who helped me. Yi Qingxian could not help but want to laugh. But taking into account that he was in the examination room, he had to hold back his emotions, and could not laugh loudly. He looked down at the only blank part of the test. He could not help but wonder, there is no question on this page. What is it used for? Much time has passed. The cicada's noisy sounds came from the distance. Yi Qingxian could not help but yawn, feeling his vision blur as he got more tired. He was so sleepy. On the blank test paper, a silver pattern subtly flashed. He froze for a moment, looked down, but found that there really was a pattern on the white paper. It was a fine, inconspicuous, and complex pattern like a watermark, slowly becoming more noticeable. Its stripes, like tangled thorns, were complex enough to make people dizzy. Yi Qingxian carefully squinted, but as if his sight had failed, as if swept away by the patterns. In the blur, a series of low voices sounded in his ears, like the other drowsy candidates were on his paper, speaking to him. Then he did not know anything. Suddenly the examination room filled with pain and loss. At this moment, a sudden silence fell over the room. Everyone was silent, and fell into a sudden deep sleep. In front of them, that blank paper reflected slight silver lights in silence. Amid the silence, a vague voice echoed in the air. It was thin and small, like water dripping. It infiltrated the silence, mixing in with the sounds of breathing, clothes rubbing together, and people's voices from the distant square. Finally it united with all the other sounds, seamlessly blending into a melody like silk. The dripping sounds blended together, like a spring gurgling water, flowing in everyone's ears. Cold and clear water poured into everyone's heart, quietly infiltrating the stress caused from the test. It was knocking on the secrets in the deepest bottom of the hearts. Fantasia number 97, The Piece Born from the Disaster Overture. Its name was The Shadow of Interrogation. Chapter 29 Shadow of Torture. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Above the second floor, the sound like dripping water spread from Ben's hands, going in all directions, evenly cascading down on the floor below. The music was as smooth as flowing water, but suddenly become violent like fire and lava, and illuminated everything that the students had repressed along its way. Write it down. Ben coldly stared at the candidates below, as if he was looking at dirt. On the floor as clear as crystal, his shadow loomed down like a terrible creature. Defying the laws of nature, his shadow quickly expanded and invaded the candidate's shadow. Instantly, everyone seemed to have been hit by lightning. Their bodies stiffened and they seized their pens. A demon seemed to roar within them, write down your most painful secret. The harsh voice surged violently, like a chainsaw battling a sword. Be no calm, Dad, brother, I've failed you. In the examination room, a boy about 17 years old suddenly burst into tears. He grabbed his pen and started writing frantically on the blank exam paper, I'm sorry, I am worthless. I did not study the music theory well. I have disgraced the family. Please forgive me. From his writing, the image of a poor family emerged. They were hard-working, and borrowed a lot of money, but they had provided him, their youngest child, the chance to an education. There was an older brother, who had been close to the younger brother once, but alienated him as they grew older because of money. And himself, who could never get good grades no matter how hard he tried. Ha! You all deserve to die. To die. In the corner, a red-haired man laughed hysterically. He held the pen in his hand as if he was holding a knife, frantically stabbing the air in front of him, and writing names on the paper. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Severus. A dozen names crossed out like a hit list. He kept stabbing with a grim smile, die everyone. Anyone who stands in the way of the Draco's family has to die. Give me the money first, I want a deposit. A thin and hunched candidate with fiery eyes wrote down his plan on the paper, I promise you, as long as I get into the academy, I will help you steal that thing. Above the second floor, the examiners stared at the scandals down in the examination room, expressionlessly recording their students' actions in their own notes. Didn't think he's a spy. Someone saw the hunched candidate, and shook his head coolly. At the end of the examination, transfer him to the discipline department. The examiner responsible for the northeast corner raised her hands, I found 2 here as well. They were spies from the other schools. This man desires his own sister. Bad character, flush him out. Ruthless character, get him out. A murderer. Take him to the police station. This man forged his medical report, he has to go. This was the most difficult part of the exam. Led unconsciously by the music, everyone would reveal their deepest secret. Moreover, this was Shadow of the Interrogation, played by a real musician. Even a spy with official training could not hide, let alone a group of immature minors. Ben smiled coldly. When his eyes reached the young man in the middle of the examination room, he was shocked. In his seat, Xuanhuan was struggling to hold up his head, twisting painfully like he was struggling in a nightmare. His hands were twitching, but refused to grasp the pen. His mind was resisting against the influence of the music. As expected. Ben smiled and increased the intensity of the music. Let me see into your little heart. What secrets are you hiding? On the chair, the boy's body was shaking frantically, like a dying snake. His hands were tightly clutching the pen, but not a word was written down. He was still fighting. Fighting hard. Say it. Ben growled. The music increased by 2 octaves, becoming more and more sharp. The white-haired was in pain, his body was trembling violently. He almost could not bear it any longer. Tell me. Ben demanded as if the devil was roaring next in his ears. He raised the pitch even higher. As if a strong current had gone through his body, Xuanhuan suddenly jumped from his seat, his eyes turned white. He was still biting his teeth, refusing to talk. Finally, the music shattered like broken glass. Iron residue fell from above, resulting in a horrifying screeching noise that made all of the proctors cringe. They did not know, but it had exceeded the safety threshold by more than 3 times. This was not a mild test, but a vicious torture breaching the souls. Even adults could not bear such terrible pressure. Say it all. Ben's eyes turned bloody red with a hellish madness and malice. His voice boomed like thunder inside the young man's heart. Tell all your dirty secrets, say it all. Something cracked. As if the last string had broken, the young man's body suddenly seized up. While holding his pen, he struggled and opened his mouth. He looked up, staring at the invisible sky, his eyes rolling back. Under the viscous force, his finally gave in. Yes, say it. Ben cheerfully laughed. Say it. Say it. The biggest secret in your heart. What's on your dirty mind? Reveal it all. With Ben's mad laugh, Yi Qingxian opened his mouth slowly. With a painful voice he began to pray. Ben was stunned. I will fill this river, let it run endless, for you, my lord, for you. The young man prayed intently. He opened his hands and drew an emblem in the air. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed by thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Bathed in the afternoon sunlight, the young man clasped his hands together over his chest. He was moved to tears by the God's teaching, and praised the glory of the Lord with devotion. In the sunlight, his body was like a saint. Ben was seething with rage. What is this? What is this F*King sh*T? What is he doing? Ben screamed inside his head. Ben's face had turned from green to bright red. He felt as if he were about to collapse. In the afternoon sunlight, the examination room was like an asylum. Someone was cursing fate with anger. Someone was crying with fear. Someone was begging for money with greed. Someone was writing a sex novel while performing a striptease. Someone was writing down a plan to kill all his brothers and sisters in competition for their inheritance. With everyone running wild, only the white-haired young man was crying with compassion for the world, writing down the century-old scripture, a creed inscribed in every devout believer. The self-cultivation of clergy. His smile was merciful, and his tears flowed with compassion as if a saint from the kingdom of heaven had fallen upon him. At his fingertips, a humble ring quietly shone with a silver glow. God, praise you, hallelujah. Yi Qingxian had a vague dream. At first, noises came from all directions and his heart was filled with pain. It had become unbearable for him, but suddenly, all the noises disappeared as if the dream angrily deflected all of the external noises. All the torture was gone, and he was back in the church again. In the afternoon sunlight, Father Ban was holding the Holy Bible. His eyes were serious as he guided Yi through the holy poems. The elegant poetry had almost moved Yi Qingxian to tears. He was immersed in this strange feeling, loudly praising the great God, and could not help himself. He scribbled down the teachings of God, and the saints. In this dream, everything had seemed normal. Only the ring was slightly hot, and exuded a strange light. When he woke up, it was close to sunset. He found himself not in the examination room, but was leaning against a soft chair in an office, spacious and bright. Opposite him, Ben with his face deathly pale gave him a very mean look. Yi Qingxian? He asked. Yi Qingxian nodded blankly. Congratulations, you have passed the written test. Ben squeezed out an ugly smile, full marks. Wow. Yi Qingxian chuckled, thanks for all of your consideration. Considerations your *SS. Ben nearly said. Ben wanted to flip the table again, but when he recalled the scene in the examination room, and he felt pain in his testicles again. What kind of drug was this guy on? Being a psychopath was not enough, he had to turn into a nut possessed by God. Ben thought. He had reformed dozens of candidates on the spot. They cried at his feet for the Lord's forgiveness, and then vowed to repent. Even their written confessions had been washed away by the light, the paper as pure as the white lotus. The Royal Academy of Music had 100 years of history. And this examination more than 40 times. This kind of sh*t had never happened. Because of this bastard, the passing rate was more than 80%. And as this was his own doing, Ben had to suffer all the consequences, from the elite faction's counterattack, the principal's withdrawal, and this guy's obstruction. When he thought of this, Ben could not help but want to grab this little bastard and beat him up. But with that letter of recommendation, real or not, he could only suppress his anger and squeezed out an ugly smile worse than crying. That little bastard better not be too happy too early. The exam is not over yet. We will see. Ben schemed inside of his head. Because it is difficult to gather the teachers from different schools, the hands-on exam will be in 10 days. Ben smiled reluctantly and maintained a gentle voice. In addition to the exam, you will also have to complete a hands-on examination. I'm looking forward to your performance. Hands-on exam. What is that? Yi Qingxian was stunned. He had a bad feeling. Do you not know? Ben asked rhetorically, managing a surprised look. The Royal Academy of Music had always focused on both knowledge and actual practice, so this test is also an important part of the exam. He paused, and softly said, this part is mainly to determine the basic eligibility of the candidates. As long as you can correctly use notes, and are able to interact with the ether, you will be fine. But for someone as good as you are, I'm sure it won't be a problem. When he finished, Ben's subtlety glanced at Yi Qingxuan's eyes. Using a voice only he could hear, he snickered softly, of course someone like you who had never interacted with ether will be a different story. Yi Qingxian was petrified. After his long silence, he softly asked, what happens if I don't pass? Eliminated, Ben opened his hands casually, his voice cold. Yi Qingxian was suddenly dumbfounded. Eliminated certainly did not mean he would have to wash dishes for the Royal Academy of Music. If he failed, he would not even have the opportunity to wash dishes. But the problem was that besides the one time in the forest when he almost died, Yi Qingxian had not felt ether in almost 10 years. Can an exception be made? Yi Qingxian asked weakly. No. Ben shook his head, have you heard of a magician without magic? Yi Qingxian understood him, and was silent. A magician without magic was just someone playing tricks on the streets. Similarly, how could some who cannot control ether have anything to do with being a musician? Just go and play the trichord in the pub. Yi Qingxian had thought of everything, but had not counted on the school asking for this. He thought that once he got accepted by the school, he would have lots of time to resolve this problem, but did not think he would be tested on this so quickly. He turned around silently and asked where he could buy an ether ball, then went straight to the store. The hands-on exam would be in 10 days. There was no time to hesitate or to waste. If he passed, then he would be on his way to becoming a musician. If he failed, everything would be lost. Chapter 30 Notebook. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, thousands of miles away from Avalon, a carriage was moving towards the capital. In the afternoon, the blazing sun shone on the wilderness. Dragged by 16 hard-working horses, the carriage was running fast on the trail. Public long-distance carriage was the result of Anglo's strong development of transportation in recent decades. The horses worked as the driving force, dragging the carriage along on the trail. Although the fare was high, there were still many people willing to use this convenient mode of transportation. In the empty carriage, a young man wearing a black windbreaker leaned against a bench. He was thinking seriously about how to enjoy the cup of poor-quality postprandial red wine in front of him. This was the last fun part of his trip. Besides him, the long carriage only had a handful of people. An elderly couple returning home, a pathetic-looking rider, and a young couple. The afternoon had been exceptionally quiet. Now the little brat should almost be in Avalon. Wolf Flute calculated the time it would take to get to Avalon. With the teacher's letter of recommendation, he should have no problem getting into the school, and that notebook. After thinking of that, he could not help but want to laugh, but the laughing movement would affect the new wound between his chest and abdomen, so he resisted. From midnight 4 days ago to the present, he had changed his clothes and identity 16 times, changed his mode of transportation countless times, and endured 3 tragic battles that almost resulted in his death, leaving 10 dead bodies behind. He had temporarily thrown his pursuers off track, but after a while they would probably catch up to him like wild dogs. How long would they chase him for the black box that was no longer with him? Thinking of that, Wolf Flute could not help but want to laugh again, admiring his own intelligence. Who would think that I gave that black box to a kid who I knew for no more than 10 hours? Who would have suspected that a white-haired kid would be involved in this kind of thing? Is this the called, do one thing under the cover of another, by my teacher? I used myself to attract the force, but the real sacred object is secretly in the cover of the notebook, peacefully brought to Avalon to complete my mission. As long as it is still in Avalon, there will never be a problem. He narrowed his eyes, enjoying the warm sunshine which made him lazy and drowsy. Yeah, who could think of that? A soft and tender voice spoke in front of him, startling Wolf Flute, yet he still felt as if he was sleeping. If it were not a dream, how could the scene appear in front of him? They were in a place at least 300 kilometers from any village. Other than frozen beef pasta, and chicken with rice, there was no other food available on the carriage. So where had this feast come from? Fresh seasonal fruits and vegetables were covered delicately with salad dressing, emitting a sweet aroma. Fragrant French mushroom soup was thrown on the side, untouched. Marseille fish and foie gras were crowded by huge lobsters, almost falling off the table. Vivid and colorful pheasants cooked in red wine seemed too exquisite for anyone to be worthy of a glance. Compared with that feast, fancy enough to squeeze anyone's wallet dry, the poor quality chicken baked rice Wolf Flute just finished seemed exceptionally lonely and poor. I have to say that this plan was very good, a young boy was saying. Behind the table, the boy wearing a black dress slowly combed his golden long hair behind his ears, then put a napkin around his neck. Finally, he held up a knife and a fork to his handsome face. He had a dazzling smile. Unfortunately, some people have begun to doubt. Wolf Flute's body subconsciously tightened. He clenched his flute, feeling music automatically reverberating inside of him. Just by snapping his fingers, he could summon the ghost wolves. But even so, his heart was still uneasy, feeling repressed. "Who are you?" he asked. "Boring question," the boy sneered at him. "Why don't you relax? After all, tension is useless." He pushed the French soup in front of Wolf Flute. "Would you like some? A hot drink will be better." Wolf Flute was drooling. He swallowed his saliva, struggling to put an end to the temptation to drink the soup and kill himself. "What do you mean?" he asked weakly. "That means that some people have begun to doubt it." The mysterious boy looked in Avalon's direction. "I am afraid that the extremely poor people of Avalon have started looking for that white-haired kid." He continued, "Some people have already offered considerable rewards for getting the notebook, regardless if the boy lives or dies." "I do not know what you're talking about," Wolf Flute responded coldly. "It does not matter if you don't know, and it does not matter if you knew already. Anyway, it has turned into an interesting situation, but you do not have to worry about it. The Eastern kid will not get into big trouble. Probably." The boy spread out his hands, smiling happily. "After all, this is a rare repertoire enough to make me happy for 2 or 3 months. It is worth celebrating." While speaking, the boy snapped his fingers. The waiter suddenly appeared, holding a bottle of old wine with an old label. The mellow aroma of the glass in the teenager's hand spread. The boy shook the glass. "My collection, white wine from King Louis's era. Would you like to try?" No, I have mine, Wolf Flute answered coldly. The boy scoffed and glanced at Wolf Flute's glass. If I were you, I would not touch it. After all, bad wine is bad wine, even with poison. It won't change that much. What did you say? Well, it's rare material called agave. It has a fast reaction, only 3 minutes will be able to stop a mammoth's heart. Other than the strong smell of alcohol, there are no other shortcomings. The red wine in the boy's glass suddenly changed into a slender test tube. In the test tube, an insect slowly twisted, turning pink due to the hot temperature. The larva of the scorpion moth was a heterologous creature that was used to test poison. Even a little bit of toxicity would make it grow ahead of schedule. With the tilt of the test tube, the larvae rolled into the red wine, followed by a harsh scream. As if a block of magnesium was thrown into water, the red wine started boiling, then evaporated. In the tube, there was only a moth fluttering its deformed wings. Feeling confused under the sun, it ran into the glass over and over. Disgusting. I suddenly don't have an appetite anymore. Wolf Flute grimaced. The teenager's brow wrinkled. He softly sighed, if I knew this, I would have let you die earlier. Hey, you. Wolf Flute began. Our happy conversation ends here, Mr. Wolf Flute. The boy interrupted his words, raised his eyebrows arrogantly, his handsome face full of indifference. Before leaving, I hope you can struggle for a few days longer. But as a reward for chatting with me, I will remind you of one thing. His figure became more and more hazy, but in the blur came a cold voice, never are there so many people coincidentally traveling together. Right at that moment, Wolf Flute woke up from the short dream, sweating. He began to open his eyes, but felt like staying in the dream for a long time. He was waking up now, everything was still in its original position. The cup of red wine was still intact, exuding a fragrance. He silently held the glass in front of him, staring at the rest of the passengers through the red wine. They were all either tired or excited. Finally, he saw the secret of those deep eyes. There seemed to be gentle footsteps coming from the top of the train. Underneath the floor, it sounded as if there were some creatures scuttling around. Even my last moment of fun was ruined. Wolf Flute sighed. The red wine fell to the ground making a sizzling sound. You guys make me mad. The night was getting closer and closer. An old man called Ghost Hand was still smoking his pipe. He was like an ordinary old man in Avalon, sitting on a long bench in the street, getting some cool air in the summer night. Are you sure you saw him living here? He asked. Next to the bench, a dirty tramp squatting on the floor nodded, and pointed to the hotel. An Eastern kid, white-haired, also with a dog, it can't be wrong. I hope you know the cost of lying to the shaman. Ghost Hand threw a heavy wallet into the tramp's arms and waved. In the shadow of the alley, a bunch of burly men rushed out. They blocked the entrances of front and rear doors quietly. The leading 2 men raised a hammer and broke the door. Leaving 2 men to watch the gate, the rest of the armed men suddenly burst into the hotel. The passing crowd was scared, hiding as they looked in shock in the direction of the hotel. A loud noise came from the hotel, as if someone was breaking into the rooms. Scared guests screamed, and were forced to shut themselves up from the threatening men. The proprietress fumbled behind the counter, whimpering. After a burst of the sounds of beating and hitting, everything became silent. Someone got a signal from the distance, frowned, then whispered in Ghost Hand's ears, "Sir, no one." Ghost Hand continued smoking silently, and looked at the tramp next to him. Under his gaze, the tramp was petrified. He trembled, and his eyes became puzzled and frightened. "Continue looking," Ghost Hand said softly. Another burst of screaming sounded. Loud crackling sounds came from the 3-story hotel. The violent search and destruction had begun again.